When I ask you to think of the worst video game sequel, what comes to mind? Is it SimCity 5 with its terrible gameplay and its extremely negative reviews day one? Or perhaps it's one of the Call of Duty games with its horribly recycled content that just feels like a copy and paste game for each iteration? Maybe on the contrary, you have a game in your mind that stands out as a bad sequel. Let's take SimCity 5 for example. This game was a bad sequel and a bad game for that matter. It was riddled with network outages, problems with saving your progress, and an overall difficulty connecting with the game's servers. SimCity 5 required you to be online to play, meaning that if you didn't have internet, you couldn't play. This would later be changed and you would eventually be able to play offline. However, by this time, it was already too late. The game suffered terrible reviews, you were limited to a small square building space, and overall the gameplay really wasn't that captivating. SimCity 5 would go down as one of the worst sequels to ever come out, soon being overshadowed by City Skylines, taking the spotlight and claiming the throne for Best City Builder, and likely maintains that title up to this day. To truly understand the nature of this video and why Monstrum 2 is regarded as such a failure, we have to first understand the first game and what made it good in the first place. Monstrum 1 is a roguelike indie horror game that takes place on a derelict container ship with no real answer or clues as to why you are there. Upon starting the game, you are met with a room full of equipment or a bathroom depending on where you spawn, with a locker shoved in front of the doorway, leading the player to wonder why would you need to put that locker there. As you step out through the locker into the main part of the room, you can find a flashlight as well as a fuse and some notes on the ground. These notes on the ground, whilst they provide some insight of what's going on, they don't paint a clear overall picture to what's going on. As you step out of the spawn room, you will find corridors with rooms along them, with a feeling of uneasy as you walk through the empty corridors, all adding to the cold feeling you would get of being alone, stranded on a ship. As you begin to explore the ship, scrounging for the resources wherever you can, you may start to hear weird noises, maybe some footsteps off in the distance, perhaps a weird swishing noise, or you could even notice the lights start flickering when they weren't previously doing so. You might start getting worried at this point, but push on regardless, trying to take stock of the situation. However, you are not safe on this ship. At some point during your gameplay, you will start hearing chase music, or maybe you hear footsteps barreling towards you. You look over to see a monster chasing after you. You don't know the layout of the ship. You are fleeing blindly through the corridors. You only had a couple of minutes to map out in your head. That's if you were even paying attention. For a new player, this can be very tense and a scary experience. For me personally, the first time I played this game, I wasn't going in completely blind. I knew how the game worked, since I was very into watching YouTubers play it, so I knew how the game worked. However, it was still a very scary experience. The feeling of tenseness and fear was not lost. This experience of first time playing is a memory I will always cherish because Monstrum is such an amazing hidden gem of a horror game. I envy people who are playing it for the first time. Those feelings are something you never get twice from the same game. Monstrum utilized a monster AI, which would make the monster roam the ship in a general proximity to the player, giving them very little time to look around an area before fear would come back into the equation. Oftentimes, the player would need to run from one end of the ship to the other to search before the monster got back to them, giving the player a sort of grace period before the monster would become an active threat again. This, I believe, is where Monstrum really shines as a game, in conjunction with all the other aspects of the game when it comes to tight claustrophobic corridors, the various different escape routes, and just the sheer uneasy feeling you get with playing this game makes Monstrum a truly amazing game that deserves more attention. When the first Monstrum started to die down and only the fans of the games were left, Team Junkfish started working on the next iteration of the series, Monstrum 2. At this time, people didn't know about the game, as it was in development for quite a while before we get the first teaser. Overall, the gameplay aspects of Monstrum, from the monster, the completely randomized map each time you play, the lonely corridors, empty rooms, and being out at sea, creates a very unique environment that really makes Monstrum shine, as these gameplay aspects all come together to create a unique game that will give you an experience like no other. Anticipation for Monstrum 2 has always been there. Many fans of the first always felt as if there had been another game coming. I would assume players generally expected another Monstrum game that expanded off of the first and added more monsters, maps, escape routes, and gameplay aspects. This is what the player base would expect, myself included, and a lot of players would remain hopeful that they would get this in the next game. May 29th, 2019. The first teaser for Monstrum 2 had been released. It featured a dimly lit room with a big gaping hole in said room. The room would shake with each loud footsteps as the Brute, one of the three monsters featured in the first game, would peer into view with his glowing red-hot eyes and his big gaping mouth, looking like a void of magma that had no end. This piqued the interest of the Monstrum community and was generally met with positive reviews. The community for the most part were very receptive for the teaser. Most people were hyped for the game and wanted to see more. Even to this day, if you go back to the original teaser, you will see a lot of people hyped up for this game and you will have trouble finding negative remarks about the teaser. At the end of the teaser, it says Monstrum 2 Multiplayer Horror Labyrinth, which initially sounds amazing, as the first game would have been drastically improved with a multiplayer co-op. Having the option to explore the map of Monstrum with your friends would have been an unforgettable experience every fan of the franchise would have wanted. Monstrum 2 was hyped up for quite a bit by the community and was generally praised by the community and received positively. However, there were some cracks showing that would later reveal to be the game's downfall. In the teaser, the developers told some comments saying it was a 4v1 asymmetric, which, for the unenlightened, is a massively oversaturated game market made popular by the game Dead by Daylight. However, the Monstrum community would stay positive for the game and would keep their hopes up for the future of Monstrum 2. June 17th, 2020. Monstrum 2 would get its first official trailer. The trailer would feature a survivor running around an oil rig getting chased by a four-legged monster, and would end up with the survivor getting killed by said creature. This painted a generally clear picture of what the game was going to be like, a multiplayer where a real person would be controlling a monster while four other people work against the monster to escape. By this time, however, the cracks in the game would start becoming more clear. Whilst the trailer was generally met with positive praise, there were likely a few people, including me, skeptical about the game and wondered if it was truly going to be a sequel to the first that deserved the title, or if it was going to be a flop. Me having this doubt in my mind, I decided against purchasing it and waiting it out to see if the game would live up to the hype. January 28th, 2021. Monstrum 2 would be released into early access for everyone to play. The game everyone was waiting for finally got released, and players flooded in. However, a lot of players would be met with bugs ranging from stability bugs, game crashes if you set your graphics whilst in a game, people getting randomly disconnected, half-assed animations, monsters not being balanced correctly, and not to mention the recycled game sounds from the first game. You would think with a successor for the first game, they would add new sounds and all made from scratch to complement the second iteration of the game. However, it does kind of seem like Monstrum 2 might have been running short of funds at this point, but I'm not sure entirely. The game was flooded with thousands of players day one. However, this would quickly die off. The game was nothing like the first, had no story, and just felt like another crappy Dead by Daylight repaste. Even the die-hard fans of the first game hated the game. The game was nothing like the first, and had barely any resemblance to the first, with the only real way to tie the two together would be the Brute from the first game. Other than that, that seemed like where the similarities end. Monstrum 2 seems to have fallen into the similar trope a lot of other Dead by Daylight style games fall into, that being, they feel too much like they are trying to copy this oversaturated market, and the only real king itself, that being Dead by Daylight, is the only real 4v1 that seems to keep its boat afloat, probably only because it uses pop culture references and being the first of its kind to keep this player base engaged. The game has abandoned its source material. The player versus AI that you saw in the first game, and I would like to shout out a small content creator called Behind the Pickle, because I would like to quote him on this line. Quote, "Player-controlled monsters aren't inherently more scary than AI monsters, end quote. And this really struck me because he had a point. Just because a monster is controlled by a player doesn't mean that it's more scary. In fact, I'd say it's the other way around. I'm quoting again, quote, "An AI monster cannot get bored or frustrated by looking for you or escaping you every time," end quote. I just want to preface, I'm not sure if that's exactly what Behind the Pickle said on that very last quote, but close enough. An AI monster won't get mad or bored for looking for you because it's not in its programming. It won't let up the search. It will keep looking for you until it either finds you or dispatches you. Whilst a player-controlled monster, the player might get frustrated that you keep escaping him, or maybe even bored. He might let up and leave, or just stop trying to chase you entirely. All this would lend to the fact that the second game just wasn't as scary as the first. You didn't have any story carry over to the second game as far as I know. They basically abandoned everything from the first game, regardless of whether it made the first good or not. And all around, just didn't feel like a sequel to the first. It just felt like a standalone game that didn't really do good as a standalone game either. Because the developers went for an oversaturated market and tried to make a game that might have worked on paper, but in reality is just another Dead by Daylight copycat out there, trying to strive for greatness. The game really feels like it's just a money grab, and they didn't really care about making a truly great game. I'm sure the developers had good intentions for the game. It just doesn't feel that way right now with how the game went. The proof is in the pudding, as Monstrum 2 has only 4 players in-game total as I'm writing this script. Overall, I think everyone can say Monstrum 2 unfortunately was a failure. This can also be seen because the developers made the game free as of February 27th, 2024. The core identity of Monstrum 1 seems to have been lost with Monstrum 2. There is no AI monster, it doesn't feel as tense as the first, and above all, it's trying to be a game that it's not. Monstrum is not a Dead by Daylight style of game. The core identity of Monstrum 1 is being alone, afraid, cold, dark, unsure, tense, afraid. All of this seems to be lost with Monstrum 2, as most of those points are lost with the game trying to imitate another game. It just feels like a cheap attempt to make a quick buck of cash, to keep their studio afloat, which in of itself isn't a bad thing. It just doesn't really require you to go make a game sequel when said sequel wouldn't work out in the first place. For better or for worse, it might not be in the best interest of both the developers and the Monstrum brand itself to make another game. It really boils down to how the devs go about making another game. Currently, as of writing this script, Team Junkfish are currently making their upcoming bootleg steamer. However, if they do make another Monstrum game, I would only assume that it would come after the game comes out, if not another game after that one yet. As I've said though, Team Junkfish will need to be very careful about how they make the next iteration of Monstrum. This is how I propose we make Monstrum great again. First and foremostly, scrap the 4v1 aspect of the game and do not mention Monstrum 2 anywhere in the game, apart from maybe bringing in the monsters from that game as AI monsters. Monstrum 3 would need to carry on the story of the original Monstrum, keep that storyline going. Maybe you're on an oil rig, like Monstrum 2. Maybe more ships that you can go on. Maybe there's a storyline going, where you're a journalist exploring ruined oil rigs and ghost ships. Maybe each map would have a specific monster on it, or randomized. There's a lot of wiggle room here. And with each map, could be semi-randomized like the first game, and the player needs to gather information from each map to crack the case of who's creating all the monsters, to put him or her behind bars. All of this could tie in together to create an amazing gameplay narrative. The player could follow along and create a nice story and expand the lore of Monstrum as a whole. You could even add a co-op multiplayer. I'm not against having a multiplayer aspect to Monstrum, as I think multiplayer could give Monstrum a breath of fresh new air and bring some new experiences into the game. However, I don't think it should be in the context of player versus monster. I think keeping the core gameplay of the first and expanding on it would be the best route to go with the third game, and would truly make a gameplay experience worth paying money for. You could even take inspiration from other games too. Maybe give a player a night vision camera to give a little homage to Outlast, maybe a weeping angel to kind of recognize Doctor Who, there are plenty of things you could do to make Monstrum 3 a truly worthwhile experience, worth playing for. Monstrum 3 would need a major rewrite, potentially using some of the ideas I mentioned above. However, the core gameplay needs to feel more or less like the original. Not exactly, but it has to expand on it. It needs to feel tense. You need to be alone, maybe with a co-op multiplayer mode, having a single AI or potentially multiple AI monsters roaming around a given map, more objectives to do, whether it be to escape the map or to gather info. You need to feel like there's a benefit to what you're doing or a purpose for why you are there and what you are trying to do. Having these story elements in a game goes a long way and may provide more insight for why the character is in the situation he/she is in. More monster abilities, more passive threats, maybe the return of the camera from the first game, maybe booby traps to impede your progress. All of these could lead to an amazing game. And lastly, where do we go from here? Right now, as of writing this script, that date being March 12th, 2024, I doubt Junkfish will return to Monstrum 1 or 2. However, the fans of the franchise can remain hopeful. I hope this retrospective serves to shed light on why the second game failed and how to avoid it in the future. If the developers decide to make another game, I, along with a lot of other people of the Monstrum community, really want to see Monstrum succeed as a game, and we don't want the developers to be discouraged from making another iteration because, as Bob Ross would say, there are no mistakes, just happy little accidents. I really want to see a return to Monstrum 1s in terms of future updates, or just a brand new game, hopefully taking the advice from not only this video, but the community as a whole, as Monstrum really deserves to shine as a game. And Monstrum 2 shouldn't stop the developers from taking actions and making it right, by making a worthy successor like we've always wanted in the first place. But what are your thoughts on Monstrum 2? Do you think it's as bad of a sequel as I'm making it out to be? Or even the community for that matter? I'm not the only one who thinks of Monstrum this way. Or do you like the gameplay? Let me know if you have a different opinion or something I might have missed from Monstrum 2. I would love to read some of your guys' opinions on this matter. I want to give a thank you to Behind the Pickle for inspiring me to make this video. I always find myself coming back to his Monstrum 2 is a Tragedy video, because he brings up some good points about the game in that video. I wanted to go over Monstrum 2 with a more up-to-date review. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya!
Launch sequence initiated. Sealing room doors. Pressurizing room. Charging vehicle. Level at 10%. At 25%. Level at 50%. Level at 75%. Charge sequence completed. Opening bay doors.